Hi, I'm Carol Kershaw,
I'm Bill Wade.
and we're here to teach you this new course called the Neuroscience-Based Techniques to train the brain, calm the stress spin cycle, and trigger the brain's superpowers. And let's tell you a little bit about ourselves. So I'm a licensed psychologist in Texas.
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and counselor, also in Houston, Texas.
And Bill and I are co-directors of the Milton Erickson Institute of Houston, and we're one of about 175 institutes around the planet.
And we've practiced therapy for a long time, and we're the authors of two books, Brain Change Therapy, which was published by W.W. Norton. It's an academic book, and also The Worry-Free Mind, which was a book for the general audience, and it was published by Career Press.
Right. And that one was a lot more fun.
Yes, it was.
Right. So normally we start this workshop in person with the thumb wrestle.
And we can do this because we live together. So we would have you
Go
go like
and
this
forth.
and try to pin the other person's thumb,
Yeah.
like that.
But another way you can do this, particularly this time, so you don't touch another person,
Because of
and
the coronavirus.
is because of the virus. So, is that touch your heart and remember feeling love. And we would ask you, why do you suppose we would want you to do this? That is, what happens to your brain? So just think about that for a moment. What do you think? Well, a lot of people have a lot of different answers, like, oh, you're doing it just as a icebreaker, or you're just getting us to laugh, and all that is true, but
Sure.
there's something really specific going on
Something
with
happens
the brain.
in the brain.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, so what happens is your brain starts to produce oxytocin.
Not OxyContin, but oxytocin.
That's right. So this workshop is based on the latest research in neuroscience, neurobiology, and the best change tools.
And we present an integrative approach with practical tools to help people move through from living in a negative state to living and thriving for longer periods of time.
There's an emerging science from about the last few years that's really going to change these people's clients' future, I
Yes.
think. And that is, each of us has hidden abilities.
And when we change our beliefs about our human limitations, we can even use these superpowers, if you will, to create an optimal state of physical and emotional health.
And as well as impacting our longevity. And so we're going to talk to you about these ideas about mental states in this workshop. So we're going to present practical tools for psychological balance by learning how to shift these neural states.
Accelerate the path towards mastery, and the results will be in a radical psychological increase in health.
That's right. Well, along the years, and Bill and I have done psychotherapy for many years now, we kept asking ourselves, what really is possible?
So what we have is the ability of the brain is far greater than we've ever thought it was before. And we might think about this as the brain has super abilities or superpowers.
It's really amazing. I think people will find this pretty astounding as we go along. What we find, though, is the most widespread psychological problems really are around the area of anxiety and depression that are embedded in what we might think of as a feeling of discontent.
So not being good enough.
And so, if you wake up in the morning, and usually the normal thing to do is to go over all the issues you think you've got, and then you end up with Groundhog Day over and over again. I'm sure you've seen the movie.
So every day starts the same, and you walk and talk and experience yourself in this same perpetual loop of negative feelings and a feeling of frustration and hopelessness.
But what we found is that there's a brand new, what we call neuro revolution in psychotherapy going on, and that is neuroscience has been discovering amazing things. One of the things is that we can turn on and off our gene expression.
We can turn on and off certain brain circuits, and we'll talk about brain circuits a little bit later on.
Right. We can learn control probably almost over almost every system in the body.
And attention makes neuroplasticity possible.
So this revolution in psychology has also been going along in human potential, and we found it expressed in athletics as well.
In sports, people are breaking records that were thought to be impossible. One of those, if you go back into the 1950s, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. He was the first human being to do that in competition. The 4-minute mile was considered to be unbreakable. After Bannister did that, within just a matter of weeks and months, without changing the equipment, without changing the composition of the tracks that they were running on, or necessarily the weather, the 4-minute mile came down more and more and more, second by second by second. And it was considered again to be impossible to break, and they found that it was not at all. And surfers, we used to think that surfers, if you were surfing on a 25-foot wave, that was the top.
Right.
Everything else would be dangerous. Well, now surfers are riding on 100-foot waves.
And then in addition to that, we are discovering, of course, and this is not new to you, that the brain regenerates cells, but in fact, our whole body regenerates. Now, we haven't discovered a way to be like a salamander and regenerate a limb,
Right.
but some of the leading scientists are talking about how this very well may be possible.
So we're going to activate neuroplasticity for transformation. And we can use neuroplastic strategies to get over problems and to, in the right circumstances of rebalancing, the body actually learns to heal itself.
Right. And we found that if you allow yourself to go into the right mental state, you trigger your own healing response. We'll be talking about that more later. So the brain really acts like a muscle. When you learn how to make it work for you, a new future opens into possibility.
And one of the things, just as a kind of aside, the brain is a use it or lose it organ. And the more you use the brain, the longer you have brain health. So people who are older, if they worry about developing dementia, besides some of the things that may have a genetic aspect to it, the more you use your brain, the more you're active, the longer you have not only physical health, but mental health.
So a number of years ago, before we wrote our first book together, Brain Change Therapy, the cool thing is when you work with your husband, I guess you didn't tell them we're married.
Yeah, we're married. Yeah, I'm married to this pretty woman.
Thank you. Anyway, that you get to have these really cool conversations, you know. And so we started having this conversation about it went like this, and we said, you know, there are all these wonderful approaches in psychotherapy, and they all work somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
But what if we could find a common denominator among all of them and make that the focus of therapy? Would therapy be more brief, better? Would it last longer? Would people make changes that lasted? And so we went on a search in the neuroscience literature, and we looked high and low, and we were astounded because there it was.
When psychotherapy of any school makes changes in the brain, first of all, how the brain is acting in terms of how the cells are firing off, and to some degree, also the structure of the brain, then psychotherapy tends to be more long-lasting and more complete.
And we found this common denominator among all the best therapeutic approaches is really a way that the mind works. It's really a fundamental transformative principle, and that is
Mental states influence everything. Mental states influence your perspective, whether you see something as possible or impossible. Mental states affect your emotions, your attitudes, your behaviors, and your very presence.
That's right. So we like to give this kind of silly example. Let's say that you get up Monday morning and you know you're feeling pretty good. You had a really fun weekend, and you think about who are you going to see. Oh, I'm looking forward to working with that person. Oh, this is going to be fun. And then maybe you're going to go to lunch with a friend, and then maybe your partner walks in front of you, and you go, I remember why we got together. And then a couple of days go by, and maybe you're having kind of a hard time with an insurance company, or you kind of had a upsetting experience of some sort, and you know you started to not feel so great, and you know the dog got upset with you, and the kids are acting out and so forth, and you get home, and your partner walks in front of you, and you go, why did we get together? Now, everybody's had that experience in one form or another. It might not be about your partner, but it's everything else. And so you have to ask, what is it that's changed?
So your attitude and your behaviors have changed, but what is key to that is that the mental state that you're in, and we'll talk about that throughout this course, the mental state that you're in has changed, and that changes everything about how you view the world and how you interact with the world.
And it happens to everybody. It's almost like this reality you were walking around in just dissolves in some other reality that maybe even seems like you're on another planet or something comes along, and you don't exactly know how you got there.
Right.
But it was the mental state that shifted you. And so there is a fundamental principle we'd like to share with you. It's that a body-mind natural inner switch, and we all have this inner switch, interrupts negative mental patterns and creates new healthy ones. We're going to talk to you about how to locate the switch and how to turn it on.
So what would you be able to do if you had the right tools? Would you be able to eliminate fear and the effects of trauma? How about eliminating addictions or resolving anger or grief much more quickly, to remove unwanted habits or eliminate anxiety and panic?
So we'd like you to take a moment and just, besides being a clinician, jot down a few little notes for yourself. What could you do for yourself if you had the right tools? And see what you come up with. Well, look out. Empowerment zone is ahead. So one of the things that we think about doing with people that are really struggling is to make sure that we help them move toward what we think of as a state of empowerment. So when you're truly at peace and you have stability of mind, you're not reactive, life stress bothers you a lot less.
So you don't need to seek validation as much. You're fueled more by self-acceptance or self-love, a connection, and you can pursue life-transforming goals.
That's right. Now, in your PowerPoint, we have a picture of this lovely little guy. Bill and I had a wonderful experience teaching 4 years for Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and it's such a beautiful place. And there is this restaurant, I guess it's built to the side of the mountain.
Yeah, Nepenthes.
Nepente, that's right, I forgot the name of it. And there are these actually they're pretty big birds that
Scrub jays.
Scrub jays, are beautiful blue birds, and they watch you very carefully for the opportune moment to come fly by and steal your food off your plate.
I had one that actually landed in front of me, and I had a little bucket of French fries.
Right.
And this little scrub jay looked at me, and then poked his head, took a French fry, and flew off. Well, the one we have here, it's on your screen, is one, and you may not be able to see it all that well because it's kind of behind the glass. There is the remnants of I think it was a banana cream pie.
Right.
And this little fellow, at the right time, stuck his face and came out with a whole face full of banana cream pie.
And he was in heaven. And we thought, wow, this is a great example of being empowered. You're not going to be bothered by human beings here. And you're going to do exactly what you set your intention on. And he certainly did, and he was in heaven with that. You think, anybody else ever think about jumping into a whole bathtub of banana cream pie. Anyway.
Yes, I have thought about that.
So what are mental states? Because that was certainly a mental state the scrub jay got into. What are they? At a frequency level, states are the result of electrical and chemical activity in the brain. And all states include emotions, activity, and cognition.
So I'd like to do a little exercise with you, but let me kind of lead you into this. In 1962, Herbert Benson, who was at Harvard University, took a film crew up to the Himalayas, and he wanted to film Buddhist monks meditating. They found a group of monks, and they were inside. It was the dead of winter. So inside this particular room that they were meditating, it was about 38 to 40 degrees, so not that much higher than freezing. And the monks he filmed were wearing little more than wet sheets. Now you would think that the monks would develop hypothermia, because if you're in 38-degree temperature and you're in a wet sheet, you're going to be cold. Well, we actually filmed this, and we've seen the films of this. The monks were meditating, and they filmed steam coming off their backs. So these monks were doing a better job than most people's dryers in their houses do in drying these wet sheets in not quite freezing weather, but close to it. So they had the ability to change their body temperature throughout their whole skin and keep themselves from getting cold. But what we want you to do, and we're going to do this right now, is for you to just take a moment, sit there, and if you wouldn't mind, just putting your hands on your lap and just let them rest. Now, you may want to sit there with your eyes open or your eyes closed, and you can hear my words, or you can look at the screen and remember a time when you were holding your hands in front of a fireplace. In the wintertime, in certain parts of the world particularly, you can find it gets very, very cold. If you've been outside, you walk inside, and as you stand there, remembering how you feel when your hands feel the heat just vibrating from the fireplace. How do you feel when your hands become warmer? Or you might remember a summer day when you were outside and you can feel the sun beating down on your hands. You might even feel a kind of warming tingling that begins to have some sense of the feeling of the fireplace, but it's coming from the sun. And you're sitting there thinking about the fireplace, or you can think about the sun gently caressing your hands. What changes do you feel in your hands? Might you notice perspiration on the bottom of your hands, in the palms of your hands? That would be interesting if you begin to start to feel that slight perspiration that comes on your palms when your hands become warmer. That's right. And just allow that to spread. And if you feel your hands becoming warmer, how do your wrists feel? And how do you feel in your forearms? How far up does that warmth radiate from your hands to your wrists and your forearms? And you haven't been doing anything intentionally, just hearing my voice and paying attention to whatever images come to your mind and whatever feelings change. So now I'd like you to take a couple nice deep breaths and just let your mind come back into this room from whatever images and fantasies and feelings, and bring yourself back and notice what has changed.
And my hands are warmer. It's great.
Good.
Usually they're chilly. Well, why do we do this? One of the things we really want you to learn how to do is to shift your state. Now, what did you do with this? You actually moved your blood flow with your mind. And this is a nice tool to use with your clients, because your clients are going to go from this thinking, gosh, if I can warm up my hands, what else can I do?
And you did it without trying to do anything. You were just following my voice
Right.
and paying attention to whatever changes in fantasy and changes in feelings
Mhm.
happen along with that. And we want you to realize that you have the ability, in a much less effortful way, to make physiological changes in your body.
That's right. So we have different kinds of states that we've been talking about. I know everybody's had this experience. Let's say it's Monday morning and you're running late to the office, and you're trying not to speed, but you're really kind of knowing that you might be late, and you're really hoping that you catch this green light, and you get right up to the light, and boom, it turns red. Now, what happens to the brain? You can notice this, by the way, your dopamine, which is a feel-good neurochemical, drops a little bit. Another day, let's say the same thing happened, and you were running late, you were hoping, oh, maybe this time I'm going to catch the green light, and this time you in fact do, and you have this sort of elevated feeling because you have activated dopamine release. Now, we're not suggesting that you drive around the city looking for green lights to get your brain working in this way, but it's just to notice how your state shifts ever so subtly with these sorts of things.
And sometimes, not only subtly, but suddenly. And we want you to pay attention to what's happening, because you are doing this at an unconscious level. And this whole day is about teaching you to pay attention to what happens, and we're going to teach you how to make it happen on purpose.
That's right. Because then you are empowered, you're in charge. We'll talk later about this idea that we learn in biofeedback, that if you can control your physiology, you can control your mind. Very powerful. So we want you to realize your brilliance. The human being is amazing in your abilities, and most people don't really know what they have the ability to do. So most people live in 19th century science, where they believe the body's mechanical, the mind is unchanging, and life happens to them. So tell yourself right now out loud, you're brilliant. Just say that to yourself.
Because your abilities are remarkable. I've had a number of surgeries throughout my life, and every surgeon that's ever operated on me, literally, has said, this is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to rearrange or fix, if you will. But they've always told me that I have the ability, my body-mind has the ability to heal. And they're going to start the process off. And then my body-mind is going to continue that process in a way that is beyond their ability. Now, they'll instruct me on what to do and not to do, so I can keep that process going or take that process further. But again, they're not healing me. They're telling me what I need to do to make sure that my body heals itself.
That's right. So we have really what's called a psychobiology of states of mind. And I'd just like to read this quote from one of our colleagues who said, "From infants to meditating monks, each state of mind is represented in ranges of brain frequencies and are organized patterns of mind, body, and brain, and influence how a person thinks, feels, and acts." And that's from Frank Putnam, and we'd recommend this book if you haven't read it, The Way We Are, How States of Mind Influence Our Identities, Personality, and Potential for Change.
So, what the brain has the ability to do is to regulate itself and the body. So we have different states of mind that drive our choices.
Exactly.
So let me tell you again a piece of research, because this is about what we call state-dependent memory learning. Everything you and I learn, we learn in a particular state of mind. And to remember that, what we have to do is to replicate that state of mind. So how did they do research that proves that point beyond any reasonable doubt? Well, they took a group of college students and they told them that they wanted a lot of volunteers. Well, if you want a good research protocol, you want lots of volunteers, you want a large N. That large N means that statistically, what you find out should be relevant. So what they did was they got a group of university students drunk. Tell university students it's going to include alcohol, and you're going to have a lot of university students signing up. So they got them drunk, and when they were drunk, they taught them nonsense syllables. These are just simple syllables that you could not hang a concept on. So no ma, no pa, just simple syllables. Then what they did was that they tested them, and they got a baseline for how they were in terms of their learning in a state of inebriation. Then what they did was they sobered them up, and they tested them when they were sober. Guess what happened? They could not perform as well as a group when they were sober as they were when they were drunk. So, what did that mean? That they just forgot the material, or that they hadn't learned it all that well? Then they got them drunk again. And without reviewing any of the material, they tested them again, and as a group, they did as well the third time as they had the first time. The only thing that had changed was their biological state. So, if you are thinking that you want to study while you're inebriated, you better be in that same state if you're going to perform as well. Well, this has all sorts of implications for all sorts of people. This is why athletes, performers, when they get to an elevated state of anxiety, they get over-aroused, they tend not to perform as well as when they learn material. So athletes who practice something get into a situation where they have to perform, and they realize that, and they tense up. They may do far better than you and I would ever think about doing, because they're Olympic athletes or professional athletes, but they don't do as well as they're capable of doing. The same with performers, actors, musicians, that when they get too aroused, too excited, too tense, they don't perform as well as they would or would have were they more relaxed. So again, everything you and I learn, we need to change the state when we're performing back to the very state that we were when we learned it. Now, there are some situations like first responders, firefighters, police, military, they learn their skills when all hell is breaking loose. So they learn something and they're able to perform that in chaotic situations, because that's where they're called to relearn or to remember that and act upon those things.
So a couple of years ago, I had a young woman call me, and from Mexico City actually, and she said, I don't know what the problem is. I've taken a graduate exam to get into business school 3 times, and I failed it each time. And I said, well, so you're studying, obviously. She said, oh yes, I really think I know the material, but I just don't do well. And I said, so do you think you're anxious? And she said, no. But of course, I thought she probably was, but she wasn't aware of it. So I told her about this very powerful idea that when you're learning something, and usually when you're studying something, you're in a more relaxed state of mind, actually. And so I said to her, this is the state of mind where your information is. So you've got to get back into that state of mind in order to be able to answer the questions. And that was rather interesting to her. So we worked on this. I had her eventually even go to the classroom where she was going to take the exam again. I said, now put yourself back into that relaxed state of mind that you were in when you were studying. Practice that. And the next time she took the exam, she aced it, of course. So this is a very powerful understanding and a tool that's also very empowering for people to understand that that's exactly how we learn things and where the learning resides.
So when we go into something like that, we're going to teach you and want you to practice more, remembering how it felt. Usually you were in a high focus state, and how did you feel when you were learning the material, so that when you go into the exam room, or you perform in something on stage or whatever, that rather than trying to go over everything at the very last, which gets you in a more anxious state, you remember what it felt like, what it feels like to learn the material, and then it's in that state that all that information is tied.
Mm-hmm. So this will be a very good tool for your clients in their particular situations. Well, it turns out that we have the neurology to detect danger. In fact, when you have a new client who comes into your office, you're going to get scanned, you're going to be looked at, observed by your client for potential danger. And so your client's going to want to make sure you're a safe person to sit down and talk to. And not only that, but we can detect danger in the posture of other people. So there was a researcher by the name of Beatrice Gelder who studied this process of how people react to fearful body language of another person. And so when people recognize that, they tense up, they go into fight, flight, freeze, faint, if it's really intense. And then they're not going to be able to interact very easily in that kind of situation. Even more reason, of course, for us to really work on establishing rapport, because not only are you doing that to be empathic, but you are impacting your client's nervous system in a very positive manner.
So as therapists, we want you to learn how to notice the state that your patient is in, or your client is in, whether it's an open state, welcoming, or whether they're frightened or scared, so that the first thing you have to do is to alter the state. So if you give them advice and they're in a frightened state, concerned state, they're not likely to take the advice that you give them.
Exactly. So we want to talk a little bit about altered states. What are altered states? You know, we're always altering our internal way we feel, and therefore connected to that is a certain way that we think. So we can't always change our thinking. You know, cognitive behavioral therapy is a very useful approach, but people cannot always change their thought. Sometimes we need a different language. So rather than trying to process unending emotional issues cognitively, sometimes it's just a lot better to alter the mind in a very particular way. You'll remember Einstein said something along the line is that we need to change the state of mind that created the problem, because if we try to come up with a solution in that state, it's going to be impossible.
And so some of your best therapists throughout history across the world were absolute geniuses in helping a client or clients change their state. Milton Erickson used hypnosis a lot and very casual language and making suggestions to help people calm down or elevate. If they were depressed, elevate their level of arousal so that they could make behavioral changes. Therapists like Carl Whitaker, Artie Lang, Jay Haley often use humor, play, curiosity, confusion to open up a person's attitude, if you will, to making change. And so again, the best therapists always, through whether it's the therapeutic relationship, empathy, or these other things that they did, they were working on an affective level, a brain state level, and they would help the client change the state so they could learn to then change their thinking and their behaviors.
So, you know, a number of years ago, we were so fortunate to be able to work with Carl Whitaker, considered to be the father of psychotherapy.
Family therapy, yeah.
Family therapy, and he asked us to come in, but this was before Bill and I were married, and he asked me to bring my father into the session. And I was very nervous about that, so nervous that when Carl said to me, well, where do you want to start? I said, well, I don't know, I'm so nervous, I don't know. And Carl took a breath and he said, well, I understand you're here to divorce this man, he pointed to my father, in order to marry this man. And my father gasped, and I took a deep breath, and I said, I don't think I'm going to have problems starting ever again. And so it certainly shook me out of, it certainly altered my state, and it helped me take more responsibility for
Well, it
starting
shook
the
things up. We
decision.
were kind of frozen when we went in there.
That's true.
And so Carl basically said, what was everybody knew, that we were here to change the family system so you could create another family system. And he did it in a playful way, in kind of a confrontational, but Carl was kind of playful when he did that. And that broke up the frozen state that we were all in.
That's true.
You know, with this great therapist, and your father didn't know him from anybody, and here we were in great awe. And so here we were, we got moving. And so what he did was the first thing was to change the emotional state of all three of us,
Right.
and all three of us together.
Pretty
Yes,
dramatically.
pretty dramatically.
Yeah. So changing and altering our states is not only important, it's actually a biological need. And this is kind of interesting to me. We find that this is true of all mammals. For example, robins, the bird, eat certain berries that make them intoxicated. Did you know that? And they end up playing silly games, and sometimes they run into things. Cats are attracted to catnip, yeah. And that makes them kind of giddy and high. Baboons seek nicotine in the wild in order to medicate depression. And of course, humans, we use a lot of ways to change our state with alcohol and so forth, but humans have a physiological need to alter states, and we have a biological rhythm that does that for us called the ultradian rhythm.
Now, we're not suggesting that you all go out and get drunk after this workshop. However, when you look at, and we'll talk about some of this later, when you look at addictive problems, problems with substance abuse, the solution becomes a major problem if people overuse or abuse chemicals. But the underlying need to create an affective biological brain state is beneath problematic behavior. So the answer is not to get people to stop trying to change their states, but to give them a way and teach them ways, which we're going to teach you today, to change that without using an outside chemical.
Yeah.
So it's the need to play, the need to change states that is underlying addictive problems or chemical abuse problems. And we want you to learn how to do that without finding yourself getting hooked with the chemicals.
So this ultradian cycle is very interesting because every 90 to 120 minutes, your body, brain, mind shifts. You tend to go into kind of a relaxed state of mind. Maybe you go blank, or your mind wanders and you get really still and mobilized. And this happens several times a day. And I don't know if you remember Dr. Pepper's commercials years ago. They were brilliant in their marketing because they tied their marketing to this rhythm, biological rhythm. So they came up with the slogan, drink a Dr. Pepper at 10, 2, and 4. And that is exactly when we go into this state. We might feel a little hungry. Generally in businesses, we have coffee breaks, so we go and we kind of boost ourselves with caffeine, or sometimes we get a little sugar, which is not a great thing to do. And it helps us kind of come out of that normal biological rhythm. So we'd like you to start watching for when your mind kind of goes into that state. It's going to happen several times in the day.
And to pay attention to it for two reasons. One, sometimes the situation demands that you override that down period in that ultradian rhythm. At the same time, we want you to be able to pay attention to your own needs because you can only override that cycle so many times before it begins to create health problems.
That's right.
So when your body is telling you you need to relax, and the situation is an absolute demand that you override that, then we want you to pay attention. Or if the situation says you must override that because you're in the midst of something that can't stop, that you then, down the road, allow yourself to pay attention and wind down.
Because it's so important for you to do that. So that mind wandering where you just sort of go off, it's a way to regenerate yourself and to deal with stress. So this is kind of interesting. When we shift our state into calmer states, look at this. This chemical DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and another one I'm not going to pronounce, are actually naturally produced psychedelic compounds found within the human body. Isn't that interesting? So it appears that the majority of practices for inducing altered states include, in some clinics, combining methodologies that change your carbon dioxide levels with rhythmic breathing, fasting, and then doing something different with muscle tension. So that's all rather interesting.
Reality, or what we experience as reality, is actually created by our dominant range of brainwave frequencies. Now, the brain is going to produce all of these frequencies all the time. When we talk about dominant brainwave frequencies, that's the one that within all of these frequencies that is at the highest amplitude. So, beginning at the highest level, we produce beta brainwaves. That's from 14 to 30, sometimes 12. It's measured at sensory-motor rhythm beta. But beta is the brainwave frequency at the lower range, 14 to maybe 20 cycles per second or hertz. That when we're active, alert, paying attention, and engaged, the brain's dominant frequency, the highest amplitude, is beta. Beneath that is alpha, from anywhere from 9 or 11 or 9 to 10 cycles per second to about 13 cycles per second or hertz. And alpha is kind of a hypnagogic state. It's a relaxed state. We go into alpha and theta beneath that when we go to sleep at night. When we're relaxed, kind of daydreaming, just not paying attention to anything in particular, we produce more alpha. Now, alpha is important brainwave frequency for relaxation and also for healing.
And if I could add that alpha really is considered to be the bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So it's a really important frequency range.
In fact, when they've done EEGs with people who've been in hypnotic trance, they find that the alpha level does go up.
Right.
Just below that is theta, which is about 4 to 7 cycles per second, 4 to 8 cycles per second. Theta is a brainwave frequency that's associated with deep meditation. It also, when we go to sleep at night, we pass through theta. We don't spend a lot of time there, but we go into theta when we, just before we go into delta, which is a sleep frequency, which is about a half a cycle to about 4 cycles per second. And we come out of sleep. Theta is the brainwave frequency, and we're going to talk more about how to use theta as the course goes on today, because theta can also be a very healing brain state. But typically, we experience theta when we go to sleep and when we're starting to wake up. The other brainwave frequency that we'll talk about a little later is gamma, and that is 30 cycles per second or higher. And gamma is also a very heightened sense of perception and is a brainwave frequencies that monks produce when they're meditating on compassion. And we all produce gamma, but they do so very intentionally.
So later in our course, we're going to show you someone who's doing something very specific and how gamma is produced. And gamma, again, is very, very important in terms of transformative experiences. So the most dominant brain frequencies that we experience lead to the mental states that we have. And so we, feel ourselves experiencing anything from calm and relaxed to anxious and fearful.
Now, high beta, by the way, up to about 20 to about 30, often is experienced with anxiety.
Right.
So the brain is kind of going in a mode, this kind of rapid thought and tension.
Right. And so every experience that you have as a human being means that you have an underlying pattern of brain waves. If you change your ratio of brain waves to each other, if you change those, you're going to change your experience. We're going to talk more and more about that.
And we're also going to, again, throughout the day, teach you how to do exercises that help you shift your brainwave frequency, the highest dominance or the highest level.
Right. So the brain operates in one of three ways we could talk about. One is either you go into over-arousal, and that would be anxiety, or you go into under-arousal, that might be depression, or you might be able to have a stability between the hemispheres and be in a kind of a very resonant state of inside yourself. And so in trauma, we often find beta is more prominent, and theta and delta tend to shrink up.
So in those states, we become hypervigilant. And again, if a person's been in a war or a fire or some catastrophic situation, it's in that context quite appropriate to become hypervigilant. But the problem is the brain can get stuck in that state of over-arousal, and when the person comes back and is no longer in that situation, they get stuck in hypervigilance, or they can have intrusive thoughts. They're high beta, and with appropriate interventions, the brain balances its frequencies and the ratios between the ranges of the brain frequency. So again, therapy for PTSD, therapy for OCD, intrusive thoughts, and so on and so forth, have to do with stimulating different brainwave frequencies in the high level of beta.
Right. And so this is a different way of thinking than most psychotherapeutic approaches offer. We're going to just very specifically later give you practical tools about how to, for example, to stimulate alpha or have people move more into calmer states of mind. And interesting, then the transformative state, which comes out of gamma, gamma tends to burst out of alpha and theta. So when people are very calm, people can suddenly have these amazing moments of insight, creative ideas, or just really have amazing thoughts about what they need to do for the future. This is all trainable.
So I want to talk about brainwave frequencies and research that's been done about that. Psychology and psychotherapy for years and years have operated on the assumption that we're all in some way screwed up. And so we developed a really good system of classification from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 5. So we have this great classification system of how we're messing up. Well, psychology began to look at, most of us are fairly functional. Martin Seligman, who was president of the American Psychological Association years ago, wanted to begin to study how most of us actually do function throughout our lives fairly well, in spite of trauma, in spite of stress and all those things. So he began to encourage people to study functioning. Richard Davidson was a researcher, still is, up at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and he began to study happiness. And in this group of people, one of the folks that he began to study was a Buddhist monk. And this research, in some ways, is looked at in, what's the author's name of
Daniel Goleman.
Daniel Goleman's book, Destructive Emotions. The monk's name actually is Matthew Ricard.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew was a French biologist, I think, had a PhD, and then decided he wanted to become a Vajrayana or Tibetan monk. And so he became a Tibetan monk, and he was in this research group that Richard Davidson was looking at. They found Ricard's brain to be very interesting, and they did a couple things with Matthew Ricard. One, they put him into an fMRI, and since Davidson knew that Matthew meditated, they had him go through different meditative states in this tube, making all sorts of noise. And he found out that Ricard wasn't that bothered. It was slightly bothered by the noise. If you're ever in an MRI machine, fMRI machine, it makes a lot of noises. And Ricard was able to just put that aside, and he went on a mini retreat. And so they got to look at Matthew Ricard's brain as he was meditating. Then Davidson decided he wanted to see if he could throw Ricard off of his game, so to speak. So they hooked him up to EEG machines and did all sorts of obnoxious things. He fired off guns by his ears, and his EEG would spike and go like that, and then afterwards it would calm back down fairly quickly. And so with the EEGs and with the fMRIs, the functional magnetic resonance imaging device, they got to look fairly deeply into Matthew Ricard's brain. And what they found was rather remarkable. Matthew's amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, the midbrain, the almond-shaped, almond-sized parts of the brain and the midbrain on both sides. His amygdala, two things. He was meditating, the amygdala actually was less active. So there was less metabolic, less electrical activity going on in Matthew's amygdala. And what they found was that his amygdala was actually somewhat smaller than you would expect the amygdala in an average man of his age. And Davidson found that Matthew Ricard had like 30 to 40, 50,000 hours of meditation. So Davidson became even more interested in how the brain operated when a person meditated for years and years and years. Brought in another group of Tibetan monks, another monk that's name became known, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, was in that group of monks. And actually, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche had panic disorder and went on a 3-year retreat and healed himself from panic disorder. So he would have panic attacks, he no longer had them. So Davidson was really fascinated with what was going on with these Tibetan monks and when they were meditating, how it affected the brain. So how do you move from looking at monks to normal people? Well, he got a group of people from chemical plants. Now we know that chemical plants are high stress situations. We had a secretary years ago whose husband was a pipe engineer. That means he would go on to sites in chemical plants and look at the pipe structure and how things were being kept up. And whenever he was on site, she'd be very, very tense because in Houston, Texas, big petrochemical industry here, what would happen from time to time in all the various chemical plants is something would happen and they would explode. So they were dangerous. And this is also true with Davidson's research group. So he brought in a group of people that were in these high stress situations and wanted to teach them to meditate. So Davidson called Jon Kabat-Zinn. Jon Kabat-Zinn had a PhD and was doing pain control at the University of Massachusetts hospital system. And so working with cancer patients and people who had back surgery and other surgeries that left them in intractable pain, where Western medicine was not able to take them any further. Kabat-Zinn teaching them yoga, Tai Chi, and meditation pushed back the limits of pain control and gave these people much more flexibility, much more time pain-free than before. So Davidson brings Jon Kabat-Zinn into Wisconsin, to Madison, and they teach a group of chemical plant workers to meditate. And what they did was they taught them to meditate about 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week, and they also would have them come in and for instruction. And they did this for somewhere 8 to 12 weeks. And they also had a control group that later they would teach to do meditation. What they found was rather interesting. Self-report, other report, as well as looking at the amygdala through brain imaging. They found that the amygdala in all these people had begun to slow down with regards to electrical activity and metabolic activity. Now, what that signals and what they learned was that the amygdala is highly influential in activity in the right prefrontal cortex. The right prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that signals danger. It is NORAD, or the North Atlantic Air Command, and it signals danger. Sometimes it gets caught in signaling danger in situations that are not so dangerous. Also, people can get caught in dangerous situations in overarousal, and they freeze rather than being able to deal with the situation. So what they found was that the client's amygdalas were a little less active, and it calmed down the right prefrontal cortex, and that they were not as anxious. And again, when you have people on a chemical plant, you want them to be aware and alert so that if something dangerous happens, they can function and get themselves to safety. You don't want them hypervigilant when they come home, because home is not a dangerous place. And so what they did was they taught these people how to meditate and act just simply sitting and focusing on their breath, basic mindfulness meditation, was able to change the way that these folks dealt with stress. Now, they thought that it would change the size of the amygdala. That was not actually the case, but how active the amygdala was something that was changed.
Now we're going to give you a lot of other tools. Mindfulness meditation is an excellent one, but you may already be very familiar with that. And as we go along, you're going to get a lot of other ways of helping people get into calm states. But first of all, we want to just suggest to you that there are subtle signs of people in either under or over arousal. And one of our assessment questions we want to find out is how the nervous system is operating with this client. Very important. So one of the questions we ask is, under stress, do you become more depressed, more anxious, or do you experience a combination of the two? And when people can tell you the answer to that for them, that will tell you how their nervous system is operating. And another question is generally, how cheery are you? So that's kind of an interesting question, because a lot of times people will say cheery. I don't know what that is exactly.
So we're wanting you to pay attention, wanting your clients to pay attention to their basic default state of arousal, depression, anxiety, or flipping back and forth, or are they capable of being cheery? Because again, rather than asking somebody to list all the problems that they have, all the difficulties they have thinking about things, we're more interested in what their biological state is and teaching them to change that.
Right. So you mentioned default state. We might want to define that. So, in our thinking and in the research literature, the idea is that you operate in a fairly neutral state much of the time. And this is this mental state, if you think about it, that you return to after you've been very joyful or after you've had an upset. And you might even give that a name. What would that be, and is that more toward the cheery side or more toward the kind of sad side? Because that default state can be altered and managed and shifted. So we had a question come up about, so how do diagnoses relate to brain states? So how do diagnoses relate to brain states? So it's rather than using labels out of the DSM, we like to look at it from a different perspective. And that is, as Bill was talking about, people get into symptomatic behavior. What is it that drives that? What drives it is that people are trying to change their state. Why do people overeat or overdrink or overshop or do over-exercise? They're trying to get into a certain state of mind and maintain it. And they found a way to do that, but it's usually temporary.
And they may overuse one way. Again, going out to a nice meal, though with coronavirus, we're not doing that very much here. I imagine you're not doing that much in Australia.
Right.
So going out to dinner or to a movie is a wonderful thing to do. But if you habitually get stuck And that is the only strategy that you have
Right.
of changing the state. Then what you need to learn how to do is find other strategies to change your state that allow you to remain functional.
So we ask our clients, if you could think about what is your target state, that would be the ideal state that you'd like to be in most of the time. And when are you in that state? We'd like you all to consider answering these questions for yourself. And what would you call that state? What would you call that target state, your ideal state? Because we can practice that target state. Well, how can you do that? One of the ways to do it is to remember the last time you were in that state. So we have taught all over the planet and just had a wonderful time doing that. But I remember being at the airport talking to a gentleman who was just getting ready to go to Hawaii. And he said, Hawaii is the only place I can go to where I feel completely calm and relaxed. And as he talked about going on this trip, you could see the shift in his body and his face moving into, we would call that more of an alpha state, just imagining being there and what that meant to him. And so we do this all of the time anyway. So, well, we've come to the end of our Module 1, and we hope that you've found some interesting and practical ideas that you can use. In Module 2, we're going to discuss the brain's superpowers. We think this is very fascinating. And we're going to talk to you about how to change states and manage your mind more easily. So thanks for joining us on Module 1, and we'll see you on the other side in Module 2.